Okay, Scott, take it away.
And I am going to start by sharing my screen here. And everyone can see ATM-4 on their main screen now, I hope.
Yep, we got you.
I have it.
I'll take no as yes. Um, I, ATM-4 is really interesting to get started in because I find it in a lot of ways to be kind of the opposite of Starry Night. There are so many things in the universe, you know, and Starry Night is attempting to visualize as many things in the universe as possible, that it's very easy to get overwhelmed by detail in Starry Night. And so, you know, I think Starry Night is fairly easy to use, but it's just very detailed, and there's a lot of stuff going on there. I think ATM-4 is kind of the opposite. ATM-4 does one thing. It literally only has one function, and that's to turn things on and then I guess turn them off. You know, all ATM-4 really does is say, make this thing happen now. That said, there are many things that you can make happen now. But in terms of learning ATM-4, its functionality is remarkably simple. Once you've got a grasp of what it can do, then all you're learning really is what are those things I can do? And more importantly, where are they kept? Where do I find those things that they can do? And that's why I was giving you a little bit of insight about, you know, finding toggles versus dims versus lists. We didn't expect you to memorize those things. You just want to know that Starry Night is broken up into fairly logical categories, which we've tried to capture in ATM-4, so that when you want to tell Starry Night, make the sun rise or turn the daylight off or turn constellations on, that they live in logical places. And so much of your ATM-4 skill is going to come from understanding where those places live and how we access them. But I think you're going to find in terms of the program layout, it's really simple and really intuitive. So as you look at the Starry Night screen, I'm just going to describe what's going on here in terms of really basic visualization. To the left side of the screen, this list, which can sometimes be quite short or sometimes be quite long, these are what we call our tracks, or more properly, our devices, our device tracks. And when we say device, what we really mean is what this thing is called. A audio playback, or, you know, putting text captions on the dome, or Starry Night, or Zygote, or Layered Earth, or anything that we can do is what we call a device. And then the whole device and the line that extends off of it, this thing I've selected here, when I select control and it's selected the line going off to the right, that's kind of what we call a track. You'll hear them used interchangeably, but the most frequent term you'll hear is like, I'm going to put something on the Starry Night track. When people say Starry Night device, they really mean this thing over here, okay? So let's say for the sake of argument, I want to do a thing in Starry Night. I want to make a thing happen. And maybe that thing is to call up a favorite that I made over in Starry Night. There's a decision that we make, a couple of decisions. The first thing that we decide is, what thing am I going to make happen? And in this case, if that thing is Starry Night, if I want to visualize a Starry Night thing, I click on Starry Night here, right? And then the next decision I make is, when in my show, at what point in my show do I want that thing to happen, all right? So we have a little thing for playback controls here. And these are going to be really essential. I'm going to close those for now, and I'm going to show you how to get to them. There's two ways to get to your playback controls. If you find your way up to the main menu here and you find View and then Playback Controls, that's going to bring up this little controller that allows you to rewind, play, stop, fast forward, etc. Another useful way to do it is the F4, that's F as in Frank 4 keyboard shortcut. If you just hit that, it toggles it on and off. So most people get into the habit, whenever they want to see playback controls, they'll just hit F4, okay? And that brings up these controls. The reason I'm bringing them up is, if I'm going to play a show, if I'm going to do what Dave showed us before and advance, I need the show to play. So I'm going to use this kind of obvious looking rewind icon to click the show, to click and rewind my time bar back to the beginning of the show. Then if I hit the play bar, it begins moving to the right, kind of in real time, right? It's just counted off 5 seconds there. And it's going to hit 10 seconds there. And you'll notice a thing that looks a little like a ruler that delineates the time in seconds, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds, up to 10 seconds. We're about to hit the 20-second point right there. And then I can stop that time bar anytime I want, okay? So when I talk about we're going to make an event happen and decide at what time that event is going to happen, the other decision I make in ATM-4 is where is that event going to happen? So let's pretend for the sake of argument, just 5 seconds into my show right here, I want my first favorite to happen. So what I do is I place the cursor right over the Starry Night track. I line it up with 5 seconds. And now if I double click, it brings up what we call the queue list. And a queue is anything that Starry Night can do, or anything any device can do, right? So the first decision I'm going to make as I build my show is I want to put a scene at 5 seconds on my Starry Night track. So I find the little button that looks like scene, SCN, click on that button, and this is going to load a favorite file. So I find this little button that says favorite. I click on favorite, and all the favorites that we have stored in Starry Night are living under this favorites menu system. So I'm going to go into, this folder I made called ATM-4 Tripper. I'm going to select Sunrise and hit OK. So now I've just put a queue, a thing that can cause a thing to happen, right? That can turn on a favorite at 5 seconds into my show. Now I noticed by doing all those steps, I kind of pushed my playback controls into the background. So if I just hit F4 again, there are my playback controls. I'm going to play. And right when it encounters that scene, what I should see in my dome view is that that scene has loaded, okay? So let me just do something a little fancy here. I'm going to home my system. Whoops, I thought I homed my system. I'm not live. Here we go. I am going to home my system. All right, so if we look at my dome view here, you'll notice that we're back on the home view. So now I'm going to play my ATM-4 script, and I'll shrink all this down so you can see what's going on. You'll notice as I play the show, as soon as we encounter that cue, it loads that scene. Okay. And before I turn this over to Brad for examples, I want to show you one more thing about how cues work. With a cue that's already placed on a timeline, if I want to change it, if I want some sort of modification to what's happening, if I double click on the cue, it brings up its contextual window, all of its settings. One of the interesting things I can change is the transition, that fade in of the scene. I could set to be very long, maybe 8 seconds or something, okay? And I'm going to put in one other cue while I'm doing this. This is a kind of a common trick that we do in Starry Night when we're building a show. You'll notice if I rewind my show, nothing happens, right? Because I'm not telling it to do anything other than to load the scene. Everything's blank back here. So when I rewind the show, it just doesn't do anything. It would be kind of nice if when I rewound my show, it sort of reset everything, right? I don't want to start my show at sunrise. I probably want my audience to walk in, the dome is empty, and then I reveal this at the beginning of our show. We do one thing in Starry Night, which is to create a black scene. And when you get your systems, when you first start working with the system, you'll probably notice there's a scene right out in an easy place to access called black. And if you click on black, it turns all the view options off, everything, they're just gone. It turns all the views off completely so that you have a black dome. The reason that black is convenient is if I'm over here in ATM-4 and I want to rewind and have my whole dome go to black, have nothing on it. If I load a scene near the beginning, scene, and I find black, double click it and hit OK, it drops a black cue here. So let's say I play my show again. Nothing happens, nothing happens, nothing happens. I encounter the scene cue. And you remember when I changed the fade up to very, very slow? It's going to take a very, very long time for Starry Night to fade up. But now I have this scene that will turn the dome black. But what I want to do when I rewind my show, when the time bar hits the very beginning of the show, I want my dome to go black automatically. So if we take this black scene and we drag it as far to the left as it'll go, if I click on it and drag to the left and it bumps into the very beginning of the show, you'll notice now that whenever I rewind my show, it goes to a black scene. Okay. So most people, actually most programmers, will start everything off by putting a black scene at the beginning of the show so that whenever they hit rewind, it encounters a black scene in Starry Night. So this is the absolute basics of ATM-4, but you guys have basically seen almost everything it does. We have devices, we have cues that we place on a particular timeline. Whenever that timeline encounters a cue, that's going to cause that effect to happen on the dome. So when we encounter this scene here, it fades this scene up on the dome. When we want to edit them, we can double click on them. Maybe I thought that that scene took too long to fade up, so perhaps I'll change it to 3 seconds. That's it. That's ATM-4's functionality. You generate cues. When the timeline encounters the cues, it launches them. That's about it. Now, it's a lot more complicated than that because there are a lot of devices and a lot of cues. And I'm going to turn it over to Brad now. I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll let Brad go into detail. But that's what ATM-4 does. That's how it works.
All right. So yeah, what we're going to be doing the remainder of our time here is doing that idea, but using it to affect different parts of Starry Night. So I'm going to get ATM-4 and my render box view up here. And so I have roughly what Scott had set up. I have my scene transition a little bit shorter. So if I rewind again, it goes to black. And I have a sunset scene set up there as well. So we should get a nice, short little 3-second transition. And look, it's sunset. Fantastic. Okay. So we have a sunset scene set up here, and that's great. But let's say we're making a show that we want to present in our actual planetarium. We have, the dome is going to be all black. There are commands that you can send to your Cove lights if you have your Cove lights integrated. So there's a lot of kind of pre-show stuff you could do, which we won't really get into right now. But, if you have everything set up, you don't know exactly how long it's going to take for your audience to come into your dome, right? You have Starry Night set up so that there's nothing distracting up on the dome. This is, say, the sunset is what you want to lead with at the beginning of your show, but you have no idea. It's probably going to take a little bit longer than 5 seconds for the audience to come into your theater, right? So anytime there's a part of your show where you want to just put in an undetermined amount of kind of blank time, you want to basically pause the show, you want to put a command in, a cue, that actually pauses the ATM-4 playback, okay? So to do that, this is actually not going to be controlling Starry Night, right? It's not going to be controlling audio or Layered Earth or anything else you might see on your ATM-4 show. It's actually controlling the playback of ATM-4. So anything that's affecting how the show runs goes up here onto the control track. So what I'm going to do is double click here. And one of the cue options here on the control track is a pause cue. So if I click on that, it doesn't give me a whole lot of options except to kind of type something in here in the tag window if I want. So I'm just going to say start with a sunset. Okay. So if I run this show now, so I'm going to rewind to the beginning, get my black scene set up. I'm going to hit play. When it hits this pause cue here, let me drag this over so you can actually see it. Whatever I typed in there while I'm sitting here on this pause, which is going to stay there until I tell ATM-4 otherwise, whatever I type there is going to show up in a text window just for me. This is not going to be up in your dome. The audience doesn't see this. This is only on your pre-flight monitor. And this is very useful. You can either put it in for what's going to happen after you unpause your show, which can be very useful, especially if you're like 20 minutes into a show. Or if you have a lot of things going on, this is your way to give yourself notes during your show. So you're in a pause. It's like, oh yeah, this is what's going on. This is what I want to talk about. So it's going to stay here. It's going to stay paused until I unpause it. And so in the playback controls, notice that the play button has switched to a pause. It's a yellow pause button there. I click that, and my show starts right back up. We loaded the sunset scene, and we're ready for the show to actually begin. Make sense? Pauses are very powerful. If you get shows from other people, you'll see pauses all the time. It's a way to just give yourself breathing room without having to force yourself to talk for exactly this amount of time while this is going on, kind of a deal. It also, while it's paused, it's a great opportunity to, if you want to do anything live in Starry Night, to go over, do stuff in Starry Night pre-flight. Go somewhere else, load a favorite, answer some questions, and then as long as right after the pause in ATM-4, you have a favorite, you have a scene cue loaded up, as soon as ATM-4 unpauses, it's going to tell Starry Night to load that favorite, and you're right back where you want to be in your show. So you can do whatever you want live, and then as soon as you unpause your show, that scene gets loaded, and you're back in the middle of your show where you need to be. So just a couple tips there for pause. And then as Dave Bradstreet was doing earlier, in the earlier session, you don't have to click on the pause button. Spacebar is the hotkey. So all you have to do is hit spacebar on your keyboard. And if you have a side touch in your dome, side touch can also unpause. So, and I mentioned this in one of the beginner courses earlier. In the course notes, and my part of the course notes should be a guide to the side touch controls for Starry Night and ATM-4. And so if you haven't already, take a look at that. That gives you, the main controls for operating Starry Night and ATM-4 there. Okay, so back to the fun stuff. So we have our pause. We're ready. The sunset scene comes up. What do we probably want to happen after the sunset scene is on the dome? What's more than likely the next thing that we want with this type of a favorite up on the dome?
Perhaps you'll advance time so that we see what happens later.
That's probably a good idea. So I'm going to go a little bit after the scene cue here. And one of the cue options here is time. So I'm going to click on time. And that's going to open up the time cue dialog box right here. There's a lot of stuff going on here, but if you take a couple seconds to look at it, it's actually duplicating the time rate controls that you have in Starry Night pre-flight. So, for example, you can play stop or play in reverse. You can play at the current rate. So if you've saved a time rate that you like into your favorite in Starry Night, then you don't have to think about any of this extra stuff here. So if you, like Scott was saying earlier, if you've saved stuff into your favorite that you're going to use, in this case, exactly what kind of time rate you want flowing, then you don't have to worry about this when you're making your ATM-4 show. If you haven't, which I haven't in this case, then we have to say, okay, new rate, because the default rate here is probably real time, and that's not what I want in my show. So if I go to new rate, now I can do either some multiple of real time, or I can use the discrete time steps that we covered in earlier sessions. So I'm just going to say real time, and let's say, I don't know, let's go 1,000 times. We'll go fast. Kelly's eyebrows raised there. Maybe I'll go 400. Be a little bit nicer on people. We're going to ignore the stop at position, but what this allows you to do, maybe we'll get to it later, tomorrow possibly, is to tell Starry Night, run time forward until this exact time. So it can be a very powerful thing to use. So I'm just going to say, okay, and we're going to rewind the show here, start it up, unpause. And so favorite loads up, and then the time cue hits, and hey, look, it's getting dark. So I've now successfully gone through sunset, and we're in a nighttime sky. So I'm going to stop ATM-4 here, and what do we notice about Starry Night? Did Starry Night stop?
No, time continued to move.
Exactly. And that is a very important thing to realize. Stopping the ATM-4 show is not sending any kind of a stop command to any of the other devices, be that Starry Night, Layered Earth, your Cove lights. It's only stopping anything else from happening. So if I have additional cues out here, ATM-4 stops, so they're not going to do anything. But the last command that Starry Night was given was to run time at this exact speed. And so until Starry Night hears otherwise, it's going to keep doing that.
Yeah, and Brad, if I can interrupt really quick, maybe another way to think about that is nothing is ever going to change in Starry Night unless it sees a command from ATM-4 telling it to do so. So if you're confused, you're like, wow, I hit stop in my show and the sky didn't stop. Well, you didn't do a thing that caused the sky to stop. Everything will keep doing what it's doing until it sees a command to do otherwise.
Exactly. So what do I probably want to do instead of going through the entire nighttime like we just did there? Probably want to put another time cue somewhere after this one. It was probably, I think it was dark around here. So I'll say, bring up a time cue. And now in this case, I just want to stop. Yeah, question?
I think Kristen just yawned unusually loudly.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Damn it.
That's all right. All right. So
I'm not bored, Brad. I'm just tired. That's all. I did not get enough sleep last night.
Be more interesting, Brad. Come on.
Oh, okay.
No, Brad, you're fine.
Here, I'll just undo the top button here of my shirt. Is that?
Somebody play.
No. I didn't sleep well last night, but I don't want to have nightmares tonight either. So I would just go with.
Fair enough.
It's really nothing to do with you. I do apologize.
It's okay. So what I'm actually going to do here is this is going to be the last time that I'm going to completely rewind my show here, because once you start getting a really long show, it starts getting kind of boring to watch the entire thing, especially parts that work. So once we get to time stopping here, hey, I timed that out pretty nicely. All right. So notice that time actually stopped this time. So good. All right. So that's running time. So I could have made it easier for myself if in this first cue I had baked the time rate into my favorite, but I didn't. So I had to go in here and save the time. Hi, puppy. All right. So Scott, you want to take over for a minute? I'm going to shift things around so I'm not looking at the puppy.
Sure. What do you intend to cover next, Brad?
Toggle.
Say that again.
Toggle.
Toggle. Gotcha. Okay, good. Just give me a moment to share my screen, folks. And share screen. Go share. Brad was much, much smarter than I was, and he thought to kind of build his script as I was building mine. But if we forget about the time for just a moment, I will show you what a toggle queue can do. Let me just grab ATM-4 and shrink it down a little bit. You'll recall in my script, we did about what Brad did. I think I've started at sunrise rather than sunset, but this will be a good thing. So I'm going to put a time queue in. And again, going back to my presentation earlier, hopefully what I did in Starry Night for this favorite file, which is called, no, what am I doing here? Sorry, guys. ATM-4 sunrise. For this favorite file, I set the time really, really fast. Kelly gave us the stink eye about that. So let me take it back to about, we'll call it 600 something, and I'm going to save over it again. So that's a reasonable speed. I'm going to replace that favorite. Okay, so just as Brad did, I'm going to create a time queue. In my case, I'm just going to tell it to go forward at the current rate, and current rate means that rate that's saved in the favorite file. So just to review here a little bit, the scene is going to load. Time will begin running when it encounters that time queue. Let's let it go some vague amount of time here. And I'm going to put a stop queue, a time stop somewhere around that point in the show. And I want to show you a little trick here. I can stop time by going back and running the show again and letting the timeline encounter that queue, or I could put my timeline somewhere in the middle. But if I just want to use the queue to do the thing that I said, I want to stop time, there's a great little button in here that says execute. Okay. So whenever I hit execute, it instantly sends that command to the dome. So say I wanted to start time, I could hit execute in this time queue. Or let's say I want to reload that scene. I can go over to this scene and double click and hit execute. And without having to play my show using the time bar, it'll instantly do that. Okay. So going back to what we did one more time, just by way of review, scene loads, time runs for some number of seconds. When we encounter the time queue, the time is going to stop. So the sun will be frozen in the sky. But in my case, I want to talk about constellations that might be visible in the daytime. So my time has stopped, but I want to see what constellations would be visible now. We have an atmosphere, our sky is blue, the sky is illuminated by the sun, so I can't see the nighttime sky. But one trick that I could do for making the constellations visible would be to turn the daylight off. And you recall in the earlier session, I talked about there are kind of simple on-off things, and there are more complicated dimmable ones. Daylight is really simple. We call that a toggle. It's a thing that can just be turned on and off. And you'll notice if I go into the toggle queues, I have a drop down for all the things that I can toggle on and off. And one of them, shortly down the list here, is daylight. If I want to toggle the daylight off, I have to make sure that I have it set to off. If I said toggle the daylight on and the daylight was already on, I would see nothing. So if I want the daylight to go off, I need to make sure it's set to off and okay. All right. And remember, if I don't want to play my script from this point on, I don't have to see that happen. I can double click on the queue to open up its settings. I can hit execute and that turns the daylight off. So now what our script does at this point is we've just added a toggle queue so that we have sunrise, we have time flowing forward. In a moment, we'll have time stopping. And then we'll have toggle. Brad, do you mind if I cover multiple tracks at this point?
Have at it.
Okay. Let's pretend for the sake of argument that I wanted my time to start pretty much right when that scene fades up. You'll notice that there's an interesting thing that happens. If I grab a cue, if I click on a cue, and I move it around, if I encounter another cue, it kind of sticks there, but I can sort of muscle it. I can sort of push it harder and it'll go to one side or the other. But it's really hard to get time to be right at the beginning of this scene. Same thing with toggle. I could kind of overlap toggle and time if I muscle it, but now I see time and my toggle cue is kind of hidden behind it. So in order to change toggle, I would have to slide this out of the way and put it back. Like I can overlap them, but I don't like a bunch of overlap cues because it's hard for me to see the toggle cue behind. So I want to teach you a way to line these things up in a more useful way. You can make multiple versions of a device. So I have a Starry Night device here, but I can add another one. I can create a new track by going into my file menu, file, add track, and I'm going to add an additional Starry Night track. So add track, Starry Night, and I can give this any name I want. It's called Starry Night 2 by default, but I kind of like to take cues that are like time and toggles and dims and things like that. I kind of like working with a track for a specific function. I like to have a scene track where all my scenes are on there. I like to have another track that has like all my time cues and toggles and dims. And then when I get into like things like orientation animations or slides or the more advanced things, I like to create tracks for those. So I have a code word. You guys don't have to use this, but I call like time and dim and list and toggle. I just call those effects. So I'm going to name this effects. And you'll notice now that I have a misspelled effects track. Let me fix that. Okay. So here's the thing I can do now. I'm going to take this time cue right here, and I'm going to cut it just like I could in any other document. I can say time cue by selecting it, and I can go to edit, and I can cut that cue. And then anywhere I put my time bar, here or here or here, if I paste, if I say edit, paste, oh, sorry, had the wrong track selected. Sorry, my bad. Let's undo that. I'm going to hit Control Z. My bad. Okay. If I cut that cue, edit, cut, and then I select the next track, sorry, anywhere where the time bar is, if I paste, edit, paste, it puts the track right there. So let's say for the sake of argument, I want my time cue and my toggle cue to be down here. If I select time, and this time I'm just going to use a keyboard shortcut. If you guys don't know the shortcut for cut, copy, and paste, they're incredibly useful. If I want to cut this cue, if I hit Control X, I cut the cue. If I put my time bar over here and hit Control V always means paste, Control V. But first, I got to select my effects track, put my time bar there. Then if I hit Control V, it pastes that one there. Okay. And now if I want to, I can have my toggle cue and my time cue lined up exactly on top of each other. Or, sorry, my toggle cue and the time stop cue. If I want the time to start, like just as that scene starts to fade in, I can put my time cue here. So we can put as many Starry Night devices as we want and layer as many things as possible. So what you'll see if I move my time bar back to here, if I hit play and my scene loads, notice that the time started rolling with almost no delay. And then what will happen when the time stops is that the toggle will happen almost exactly at the same time. We'll have a time stop and a daylight toggle off at the same time. Now, why didn't time stop? What happened? Stop. That's interesting. Well, I don't know what I did wrong there, but in theory, what may have happened is sometimes if they're exactly on the same frame, if they're on identical frames, Starry Night can trip up just a little bit. So you might want to take those and separate them by just the tiniest little bit. So let's try that one more time. Time rolls. And we should toggle daylight off and see time stop at just about the same time. And there we go. So a really good trick to remember, if you're trying to get cues to happen at almost exactly the same time, create a couple of tracks, put one on top of the other, and that allows you to stick them very close together. All right, Brad, I'm going to stop my screen. I'll give it back to you.
Okay. Sorry about that little distraction earlier. Glanced at the puppy too directly. So I'm going to get my show up here. And let me just catch up briefly. Now, something to note here, once you have a track highlighted, up and down arrows quickly move you between tracks. So I just down arrow, then I have my cue there. And if you're really wanting to kind of fine tune where your cue is, left and right arrows, move it frame by frame. And if you want to get really, really exact, in every cue, if I open it up here, the hours, minute, second frame right here, this is exactly where in the show that cue lives. So if I go here and say changes to frame 9, what we should see is this toggle cue bumps forward just a couple of frames. So just something to, if you really want something exact, that's how you can do that. So I'm just going to run this to get all caught up there. So we're going to have, I caught up, I put a sunrise in, so I match Scott. Time will stop, and we should have daylight toggle off. And then the next thing that we'll do is, let's do, did I do a time stop? I did.
You seem to have a little time stop bug.
Interesting. Let me try putting that one there. There we go. Anyways, let's take a look. Let's do another toggle cue. Let's say, let's say the daylight's off. What constellations can we see right now during the day? So that's going to also be a toggle cue. So you can kind of think of, again, the toggle cue, if there's a display option, a view option that you can just toggle something on or off, it's probably going to be in the toggle cue in ATM-4. So if we look in the drop-down list, I have, hey, look, all the constellation lines. So I have that selected, and I want to turn them on. And to test this, remember, all I have to do is hit execute, and we should see, hey, look, all the constellation lines pop on. And how about right after that, I also want to see all the constellation labels. I can go into the toggle cue again. All constellation labels on. And boom, just like that. Okay. So you notice in the toggle cue, there's a lot there. So, when you have some time, go through it, see what options you have there. There's a lot of stuff that you can do without having to load a brand new Starry Night favorite. So we have constellations up there. That's great. Let's take a look at another cue, the dim cue. So I bring that up. And I look at the options here. We don't have as many options here as we did for toggle. The dim cue, what this is doing is giving you the ability to not just turn something on, but to turn it on at some fraction of 100%. So you could turn it all the way on by just, if I want the ecliptic, for example, is a good one. I could set the ecliptic to 100%, which is turning it all the way on. And if I hit execute, what we see is my ecliptic line shows up, displaying how I had it saved in my favorite. So if I set this up better ahead of time, we would be able to read the months a little bit easier. But what the dim cue lets me do that the toggle doesn't is, let's say I don't want the ecliptic all the way up like that. I want it 80%. Or maybe 60%. I can make it so that it's visible, but not super distracting. So we can see, okay, oh yeah, those are the constellations that lie along the ecliptic. Okay, cool. But it's not kind of in your face like, okay, now we're talking about the ecliptic and nothing else. So you have the ecliptic there. Another one that you might use, the Milky Way. This is a great way to, in your ATM-4 show to, okay, we were in the city, now let's go out in the country, and the Milky Way gets a lot brighter. It's a great way to do something like that. And a few other options there that you can play with. Light pollution is a good one. So I'll say, okay. And I now have my dim cue right here in my show. Okay. So let's say a little bit after that, I want to turn everything off. I think I'm going to turn everything off because it's starting to get busy. Or what else could we do? Instead of going through the options and turning the constellation lines off and the ecliptic off, what's an easier way if I'm kind of done with this scene and I want to go to the next part of my show? What could I do?
You could try making another scene.
Yeah, let's just make another scene. So we could all, you can always build more and more stuff, but sometimes it's nice to just have a good scene transition. So I'm going to go into my favorites and take a look at Institute 2020. You know what? I'm going to go to Saturn. Let's hit execute here.
Just as a reminder, Brad, you have about 5 minutes left in this session.
Okay. And I'm going to give this a little bit of a transition time. So a trick I'm doing here is instead of going into the queue itself and setting that transition time, you put the cursor right on the edge of the queue. Notice it changes from that little plus sign to an arrow in one direction, not two directions. When you see that, you can then click and expand or contract the queue and give it whatever transition time that you want. All right. So we're at Saturn, and what we're going to end on today is kind of get started on the list queue. So I'm going to select list. And the list queue, when that opens up, we have two drop-down menus that we have to choose from. And the list is essentially your way in ATM-4 of turning individual things on and off in Starry Night. So where the toggle and the list are kind of linking you to the display options, the view options in Starry Night, list is linking you to the find or the planets window. So if I want to, for example, turn one constellation on, I would select this first drop down and find constellations. And once I do that, I select the database, where I want to look. ATM-4 automatically loads the next drop-down menu with all the objects that are part of the constellation group. So now I can go down here and say, hey, Ursa Major, let's turn that one on. And if I test that, I get Ursa Major appearing in the sky there. Okay, so again, list is your way of turning on individual constellations. So if we do another one, let's say at the same time as Ursa Major, let's do another constellation. And let's see here, should be able to do Minor. Look at that. So we could build up, a subset of the constellations to display if we want to at this time. So I think with a couple minutes left, I don't really want to get into anything new here. So the list here, I'll just open it back up and let you take a look. So you could do asterisms. You could label solar system objects. There are so trails. So if you remember the local path, where either earlier today or yesterday we had the sun trace out the Analemma, and we had a couple planets do retrograde. This is how you can do that from ATM-4. This is the same thing as turning on the local path in Starry Night. So you can do that from the list queue here as well through in ATM-4. So I think that's kind of a good place to stop. We have another one of these, I know, tomorrow. And so we'll kind of pick up where we left off here and look at some more of these options. Get a little bit more complicated, but in the last minute or two, anyone have any questions on anything we've covered? Me or Scott?
I've got a question on the control. So that was where you paused everything, is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. So the control track here is where you put commands, cues that are going to affect how the ATM-4 show runs. So the pause is by far the most frequently used one, but you have other options here. You can, if you want, you can loop a section of the show. Not a lot of people use that one, but something Dave has talked about, I know, this week already, sub shows, where you can link to other ATM-4 shows that you've already made. So let's say you have, or link to one of his full dome curriculum shows. So the star size show that he went over yesterday, you could put that into your own show as a sub show, and that would go in the control track. And what that would do is ATM-4 would play. When it hit that cue, it would jump to that other show, run it all the way through, and when it got to the end, it would then jump back to your main show. So that can be a very, very useful feature. Yeah,
So
pause
one of the,
and all that stuff goes on the control track.
okay. So a lot of times when I have kids coming into the planetarium, I'll have some music playing.
Mm-hmm.
Could you have the music playing while the show is paused, or does that control pause everything?
No, the pause only pauses ATM-4. Anything else that's going on, like if I put a pause in while Starry Night had time running, time would keep running. So yeah, and we'll cover the putting music in tomorrow. But yeah, if you have music playing in the background, the pause in ATM-4 is not going to pause your sound, your music playback. Good question.
And did you also say that you could have, let's say, for example, Starry Night, Layered Earth, and Zygote all as part of this?
Yes.
So you could do like a powers of 10 thing using all three of those?
Yep.
All right.
Yeah. ATM-4 can control each of those individually. And then there's another small application called Screen Manager that just changes what you see on the dome, on the render box. And so when you got done with Starry Night and you wanted to switch to Layered Earth, for example, you just put a cue that all it does is put Layered Earth on the dome instead of Starry Night. But yes, you can definitely do something like that. Okay, so we are in another break time. And I believe after this, we have two options. JT and Michael are going to be doing kind of the basics of a star show. So everybody does star shows. So if you haven't before, or you're kind of out of practice, that might be a good one to go to. If you want to get into really heavy duty stuff, Dave and Steve are going to be showing you how to create your own asterisms and constellation sets. That one is useful, but it's definitely involved. So those are your options.
There is also the networking room, I think, also.
There is, yeah. And if you just kind of want to take a break for a while and watch both of those sessions later on YouTube, that's also fantastic. We have kind of the chill room that's also on the schedule there. If you want to go there, hang out, chat with some people, ask questions about stuff, you're more than welcome to do that as well. So
yeah,
thank you.
Let us know in particular if you want to see one of us in the networking room, please.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Brad.